The deed trembled in Dana's hands as the shredder whirred to life. Her daughter, her only child, had just texted, "You'll regret erasing me, Mom." But Dana no longer flinched at empty threats wrapped in guilt. She fed the title through slowly, watching her signature and Morgan's entitlement disappear in strips. Outside, daffodils bloomed in the garden her daughter never watered. Inside, a mother rewrote the meaning of letting go, with precision, not permission. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The eulogy was still echoing when I saw my hangers were bare. The front door clicked shut with a softness that betrayed the weight behind it. Dana dropped her keys into the ceramic bowl on the foyer table. Lillian's bowl, the one with the cracked glaze and the thumb-sized chip on the rim. It had always lived by her sister's door. Now it lived by hers. She walked slowly, still in her funeral dress, heels pressing lightly into the carpet as if any sudden noise might shatter the fragile air. The house smelled like lavender and lemon wood polish. Morgan had helped by cleaning earlier that morning. Dana paused outside her bedroom. Something was wrong, not visibly, not loudly. Just off. The closet door was slightly ajar. She stepped in. Empty. The bar was bare. Hangers dangled like bones. Her wool coats were gone. The silk scarves Lillian had mailed her every birthday. Gone. The cornflower blue dress she wore at her retirement party. The soft gray cardigan she used to wear while painting in the studio. Gone. 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 Only a faint scent lingered. Rosewater and dryer sheets. Dana blinked, once, twice. Her hand went to the edge of the door, steadying herself. She walked backward into the hallway, slow, deliberate. Morgan stood there, leaning against the banister, holding a coffee mug, scrolling her phone like this was Tuesday and not the day Dana buried her only sister. "It was time to let things go, Mom," she said without looking up. Dana's voice was quiet. "Without asking?" Morgan finally looked up, her expression something between defensiveness and false calm. "You didn't need it. Half that stuff was decades old. Honestly, you've got too much history anyway." Dana stared at her daughter. Morgan's hair was perfectly curled, lip gloss precise. Not a single trace of red-rimmed eyes or funeral fatigue. She looked like she'd come from a brunch, not a burial. "What did you do with it?" Morgan shrugged. "Donation mostly. Some of it just gone. Don't be mad. Grief is heavy. I was helping you lighten it." Dana didn't answer. She turned, walked down the hall. Her steps didn't falter, but something in her shadow did. Something slower, more deliberate now. She entered the study and closed the door behind her. The room was colder than the rest of the house, dimly lit. The smell of wood, old books, and eucalyptus drifted from a half-burned candle on the windowsill. Dana moved straight to the oak desk and knelt in front of it. She opened the bottom left drawer. Inside, nestled between neatly labeled folders, sat a leather-bound envelope marked in gold ink. Deeds plus cosign. Her fingers didn't tremble as she opened it. The original title document lay inside, crisp and clean. Dana ran her hand across it. The ink hadn't faded. Neither had the power behind it. Morgan had been so desperate 5 years ago, newly divorced, a toddler on her hip, credit shot to hell. Dana had offered to co-sign not just the mortgage but the down payment too. Morgan had promised, "It'll be yours too. You'll always have a place here." But the Christmas cards had dropped Whitaker and Dana. The bills arrived without her name. Morgan had called it my house for years now, online, to friends, even to Dana herself. But she had never transferred the deed. Dana exhaled. She wasn't angry. Not yet. What she felt was older than that. A sensation like slow ice forming across a pond. Quiet, patient, unstoppable. She pulled the title from the folder, set it on the desk, and reached for her reading glasses. Then she opened her laptop and typed a new file name, Intent to Reclaim Property, Draft 1. She saved it to her desktop. Outside the closed door, Morgan laughed at something on her phone. Dana didn't flinch. She reached back into the drawer and pulled out a small silver key taped to the inside lid of the envelope. the one that opened the safe deposit box, the one Morgan didn't know existed. She laid it beside the deed. She pulls out the title to the house Morgan lives in, still in Dana's name. She called it ours online, but only I paid closing costs. The house had white shutters and a wraparound porch. Morgan had cried when they got the keys. Big, cinematic sobs, the kind Dana hadn't seen since Morgan was 12 and her hamster died. Dana had held her then too. Except this time, the tears weren't about loss. They were about rescue. "Mom," Morgan whispered, hand trembling as she turned the front doorknob for the first time. "I wouldn't have this without you." "You don't have it alone," Dana had replied. "We built this together." Back then, Dana still believed shared meant mutual. It had started with one phone call. Morgan's voice, thick with panic, explaining the bank had rejected her loan. The divorce had wrecked her credit. The toddler needed stability. The apartment smelled like mildew. Dana had told her to take a breath. Then she'd called her own bank. 2 weeks later, Dana wrote a check for $67,500, half the down payment. She co-signed the mortgage paperwork at the last minute, wore a blazer, used her full name. Morgan, red-eyed and hopeful, promised with a hand over her heart, "You'll always have a place here. If you ever get sick or need help, this house is part yours." They took a photo in front of the for sale sign. Morgan posted it that night. "Our fresh start. Hashtag a new beginnings on Justice Girls." There was no mention of her mother in the caption. Dana didn't mind. Not then. But time has a way of keeping receipts. 3 years after the purchase, Dana noticed she was no longer receiving the water bill or the tax notices. She assumed Morgan had gone paperless. Until one afternoon, a holiday card arrived from Morgan addressed to the Whitakers. No mention of Dana. Not even Nana scribbled in the corner for Max, her grandson. That winter, a family friend tagged Morgan in a housewarming re-celebration post. Morgan smiled in front of the fireplace with her son. The caption read, "Couldn't be more grateful for this home I built myself." Dana had stared at the screen for a long time. She hadn't commented. Now, 5 years later, she sat in her study. The title deed laid flat on her desk like a forgotten contract come back to life. She pulled up the county's property records database. The interface was old, clunky, like it had been built when typewriters still mattered. She typed in the parcel number from the deed and waited. One match. Owner of record, Dana M. Whitaker. No transfers on file, no secondary owners listed. Her name was still the only one legally tied to the house. No amendments, no changes. Morgan had never updated it, so she really had nothing but borrowed walls and unspoken assumptions. Dana sat back in her chair, hands in her lap. For a moment, all she heard was the tick of the antique mantel clock and the low murmur of a lawnmower 2 houses down. She stood, walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and sipped slowly. Then she returned to her desk, opened a blank Word document, titled it, "Intent to Reclaim Property, Draft 1." She paused, then typed, "This letter serves as formal notice that legal title to the residence located at 47 Sycamore Lane remains solely with Dana M. Whitaker. Per legal right and without transfer of ownership, intent to reclaim primary residence has been filed." She stopped there. Not because she was uncertain, but because she knew. Once this moved forward, there would be no turning back. She glanced out the window, where the sky had turned overcast. One cloud, dark and bloated, hung directly above the house. She clicked save. Dana opens a new document. "Intent to reclaim property, Draft 1. I went to Goodwill and found my grief for $6.99. The scarf was the first thing she saw. Folded loosely on a metal rack near the entrance, it still held the faint scent of sandalwood and fabric softener. A pale marigold with hand-stitched trim, one of Lillian's last gifts. Dana touched it gently, as if it might disintegrate under her fingers. She turned the tag. $6.99. Her breath caught. Not in anger, not even in shock. Just the quiet gasp of recognition when a piece of your past reappears without warning. She didn't move, just stood there in the stale hum of fluorescent lights, surrounded by second-hand mugs and forgotten puzzles, the world narrowing until it was just her and the scarf. Then she saw the tea tin. Bright cobalt with little ivory cranes. Lillian used to store loose jasmine in it. Dana had kept it near her window, empty now, but sacred. She picked it up. The dent near the rim confirmed it. This was hers. And then came the blouse. Soft teal silk, 3/4 sleeves, a faint stain on the left cuff from when she dropped cranberry punch at her retirement party. She remembered laughing. Lillian had dabbed it with soda water, joking that nothing retired more gracefully than silk. Tag, $9.49. Dana walked to the register with all 3 items in her arms, careful not to crush them against her coat. The clerk, a college-age girl with a lip ring and lavender braids, gave a nod. "We just put that stuff out. Someone dropped off a full carload this morning, said it was part of a... what did she call it?" She tapped her nails against the counter. "Oh, a cleansing ritual." Dana didn't react. She reached into her purse, pulled out her card, and slid it forward. "She always was thorough," she said softly. No eye contact, no elaboration. Outside, the cold. Bit harder than it had when she'd arrived. Dana opened the car door, placed the items gently on the passenger seat, and sat for a long moment with the engine off. In the quiet, she imagined Morgan standing in that closet, arms full of fabric, fingers brushing past memories she never bothered to ask about. History doesn't need to be inherited to be stolen. At home, Dana laid each item on her bed. The scarf, the blouse, the tea tin, like a curated exhibit, things that were taken without permission. The house was still. Even the refrigerator seemed to hum more softly, as if it too was holding space for something sacred. Dana sat at her desk, opened her laptop, and pulled up her legal template folder. She hovered for a moment, then clicked Notice to Vacate for personal reuse. The blank document opened. She began typing slowly. To current resident, per title owner, Dana M. Whitaker. This notice serves as formal intent to revoke non-rental residency at 47 Sycamore Lane. She stopped, closed her eyes. The words didn't shake. They sharpened. Later that night, she poured herself a glass of red wine. Not to calm her nerves, there were none left to soothe, but to toast what was coming. She carried the glass into the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, fingertips trailing over the tea tin. Her phone buzzed. Morgan, via Instagram. Spring energy. Decluttering karma. Clean space. Fresh chapter. The post showed a pile of boxes stacked neatly in the garage. Dana recognized one, its frayed corner from the year she moved back from San Diego. The caption floated over the screen like a slap. Clean space. Dana sipped her wine, then leaned forward and whispered toward the screen. Good, let's clear some more. Morgan posts on Instagram. Spring energy. Decluttering karma. Clean space. She thought she'd get the house. I remembered she didn't even get the mortgage. The office was quiet, not sterile. The kind of quiet built from decades of discretion and clean victories. Framed degrees lined one wall, a single bonsai on the windowsill, the only thing alive and growing in the room. Dana sat in a high-backed leather chair across from Franklin Rhodes, her longtime attorney and the only person who knew the true ledger of her life. Franklin adjusted his glasses and tapped a manila folder labeled Whitaker Residence with one long finger. Let's make sure we understand the paper trail before we move to action. Dana nodded once. She didn't interrupt. She had waited 5 years for this conversation to be necessary, and she wasn't about to rush it now. She never filed a deed transfer, Franklin continued. No quitclaim, no joint tenancy, not even a tenancy in common. The property tax record, utility account origin, purchase file, all tied to you. He flipped a page. Her name doesn't appear anywhere but the emergency contact form for the gas company. Dana's lips pressed into a thin line, but she said nothing. Franklin leaned back slightly. You own the house, Dana. No ambiguity. If she was under the impression she inherited it, she didn't read the documents she never signed. Dana finally spoke, her voice low but even. She assumed generosity was the same as surrender. Well, he said, steepling his fingers, you co-signed. You fronted half the down payment, but you retained title and allowed occupancy without formal rent or lease. It's not unheard of. It's called informal permissive residency. She's been telling people it's hers. She can say whatever she wants online, Franklin replied with a dry smile. The county doesn't check Instagram. Dana let the silence settle before she asked the question she already knew the answer to. And legally, I can revoke it? Absolutely. You don't even need a reason, Franklin said, but you have plenty. Her disposal of your belongings, her social media statements, and her public posture as sole owner? You've got behavioral justification if this ever ends up in court. I don't want court, Dana said. I want closure. Franklin reached into his drawer, withdrew a single-page document, and placed it in front of her. We can serve a 30-day notice to vacate. No threats, no escalation. Just a simple legal truth. You're exercising ownership. Dana picked up the pen. Send it through a courier, certified. I want her to sign for it. Understood. He folded the document carefully, slid it into a linen-textured envelope, and sealed it with a press of his palm. It'll be hand-delivered by tomorrow afternoon. Dana didn't thank him. She nodded once, stood, and tucked the envelope into her purse. Her hands were steady, but her bones felt heavier than they had in the morning. She didn't go home right away. The thought of walking into that house, filled with silence, shaped like Morgan, was too much. Instead, she drove to Willow Hill Cemetery, a small patch of sloped green tucked behind the Lutheran church, where her sister Lillian had been buried just 1 week ago. The sky had gone pale gray, and the willow tree above the plot wept branches down like curtains, shielding the headstone from the wind. Dana stood at the foot of the grave. She didn't cry. She didn't speak for a long time. Then, softly, she said, "You always said I was too soft. That I bent too far for people who gave me less than I gave them." She opened her purse and rested her hand on the envelope inside. "Well," she whispered, "let's see how steel sounds." She was still sitting in her kitchen an hour later, reading the newspaper when her phone buzzed. One notification, no fanfare, courier service confirmation. Delivery successful. Signed for by Morgan L. Whitaker. Time 3:12 p.m. Dana exhaled, long and low. She didn't smile, but something in her chest loosened, like a seam pulling free from its thread, clean and final. The courier sends confirmation. Notice delivered. Signed by Morgan. She thought I'd sob. I served. The phone rang just after sunset, and Dana knew who it was before she even looked. There was something frantic in the air, a pressure that seemed to hum against the windows, the kind of weather that followed confrontation. She stared at the screen. Morgan. She let it ring twice before answering. She wanted the silence to land first. "Mom," Morgan blurted before the greeting had even passed. "You can't just take it back." Dana remained seated in the armchair, legs crossed at the ankle, fingers curled around the armrest like she was holding on to something real. "Take what back?" she asked, not with confusion, but with calculation. "The house." Morgan's voice cracked between disbelief and entitlement. "You sent some legal thing? Like eviction? Are you kidding me?" "I never gave it away, Morgan." Dana's voice was calm, clipped at the edges. "You lived there. I allowed that. But nothing was ever transferred. You assumed the gift. You let me live there. You signed off on the loan. You said it would be mine someday." "No," Dana said. "You said that. I never agreed." There was a pause on the other end, the kind that carries the slow awareness that control might not be where you thought it was. Then came the pivot. "This isn't rational," Morgan hissed. "You're grieving. You're not thinking straight. Franklin's pushing you into something. He's manipulating you. Or that woman, that therapist you see." Dana didn't respond to the bait. Instead, she opened the manila folder on her lap, pulled out a one-page form, and stared at the signature at the bottom. Her doctor's, dated 3 days ago, confirming full cognitive function, sound mental state, and fitness for independent legal decisions. She spoke slowly. "I've faxed over my cognitive evaluation to Franklin. You'll be receiving a copy through your attorney." My what?" Dana let that question hang. I understand how that word makes this feel real. I recommend you get one. So you're not reacting emotionally to what was always legal fact. There was static on the line. A pause that no longer belonged to hesitation, only dread. You're heartless, Morgan said, low now. Dad would never have done this. Dana's breath caught, but not visibly. Her voice remained steady. Your father died with his name still on the deed to our marriage, Morgan. That's not the legacy I'm protecting. She ended the call. No goodbyes. By morning, Franklin had filed the formal intent to reclaim primary residence with the county clerk. The 30-day clock was now ticking, loud and slow. Every day that passed would become a legal digit in the countdown to closure. Dana updated her will that same afternoon. A new clause in plain language: no inheritance without presence. Defined not by blood, but by consistent witness and reciprocal care. She initialed it twice and placed the page inside the document sleeve, marked Revised Legacy. That evening, Dana did not sit in the kitchen or the living room or her study. She walked instead to the back of the house, to the room that had once belonged to Lillian when she came to visit during chemo, during the final year, during the stretch of weeks when Dana became nurse, chauffeur, chef, and sister again. The room was empty now, the bed stripped, the window open just slightly. The breeze carried the faint scent of fresh-cut grass and old lilac. Dana stood in the doorway for a long moment before stepping inside. She sat on the edge of the bed frame and let herself feel the stillness, not as absence but as space, a space she could now reclaim. She let herself smile, not wide, not triumphant, just the kind of smile that happens when silence has been earned. At 11:48 p.m., her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Morgan, we'll fight this. I have people. Dana read it twice, then turned the phone over, screen down, and closed her eyes. Morgan texts, we'll fight this. I have people. Her people were bloggers, mine were lawyers. The first screenshot came from Margaret during breakfast. Dana had just poured herself a second cup of coffee when her phone buzzed, lighting up, with a message that simply read, "Is this about you?" She opened it to find a post from Morgan's Instagram account. The caption sprawled across a pastel background that looked suspiciously like one of Dana's old scarves. When you love someone your whole life, and they turn on you, it breaks more than trust. It breaks family. Some parents should come with a warning label. Toxic family, elder abuse. Fight for what's yours. The comments were full of sympathy and outrage. People Dana had never met. People Morgan barely knew chimed in with hearts and hashtags. She scrolled once, twice, and there it was in plain view, at Morgan Reclaims. Dana Whitaker is not the woman she pretends to be. No subtlety, no deniability. It wasn't just passive aggression anymore. By mid-morning, 3 more friends had forwarded posts. One from Morgan's TikTok account featured a slideshow of the house, with captions implying it had been stolen back by a manipulative parent. Music swelled beneath her voiceover. When your own mother treats you like a guest in your childhood. Dana closed the apps without watching more than a few seconds. Instead, she picked up the phone and called Franklin. "I'm guessing you've seen this," she said. "I have," he replied evenly. "And I've already begun drafting a cease and desist. Public libel, especially when it names you directly and implies criminality, is grounds for legal action." "I don't want to sue my daughter," Dana said softly. "You're not suing. You're establishing that you won't be publicly slandered just because you enforced your rights." Dana said nothing. The silence was her agreement. That afternoon, she opened her desk drawer and pulled out her medical folder. Inside was the durable power of attorney and healthcare proxy form she'd signed years ago, naming Morgan as her emergency contact and medical decision-maker. She stared at it for several minutes, not out of hesitation, but out of ritual, out of respect for the past that had once made this make sense. Then she uncapped her pen and struck through her daughter's name with a single, deliberate line. She replaced it with Franklin's. No ceremony, no mourning, just a clean cut. At dusk, Dana walked through the empty guest room again. The walls echoed now, Not with sound, but with possibility. She called a local women's foundation she'd once donated to during one of Lillian's birthday fundraisers, a group that supported housing for single mothers escaping unstable households. "I have a property that may become available in the next few weeks," she said, her voice even but clear. "It's in a good school district, corner lot, fully updated." The woman on the line paused. "And you'd like to sell it to us?" Dana looked out the window where the streetlights were beginning to flicker on. "I'd like to give it, depending on how things unfold. Could your organization place a family quickly, if needed?" There was a stunned silence, then a quiet, "Yes, we absolutely could." Dana made a note in her journal that night. Let grief be generous, but never directionless. The next morning, the phone rang just after 8. She didn't recognize the number, but the voice was unmistakably clipped, rehearsed, and legally polished. "Mrs. Whitaker, this is Lauren Grant. I'm representing your daughter Morgan. We'd like to open discussion regarding the current housing situation. Are you willing to mediate?" Dana paused just long enough for the question to sting, then said calmly, "Send your terms in writing." Morgan's lawyer calls. "We'd like to mediate." She said it wasn't personal. I showed her the receipt for the house. The conference room smelled like filtered air and paper, bland, sterile, a place scrubbed of emotion by design. Dana sat quietly at the long oak table, hands folded, back straight. She wore a matte black pantsuit, pressed sharp at the edges, and a single pearl at her throat. No accessories, no indulgence, just intent. Across the table, Morgan walked in 10 minutes late, high heels tapping with choreographed urgency. Her lips were glossed, hair pinned in an elegant knot, and a pastel cashmere wrap draped casually over her shoulder. She was dressed like someone auditioning for empathy. "Mom," she said with an upward tilt of her voice, as if this were a coffee shop run-in and not a legal mediation. "You look serious." Dana didn't answer. She merely offered a nod, then returned her gaze to Franklin, who was adjusting a stack of labeled folders before him. The mediator entered next, a tall man in his 50s with a disarming smile and a legal pad already half filled with notes. He introduced himself as Warren, shook hands lightly, and took his seat at the head of the table. Morgan's attorney, Lauren Grant, sat beside her, opening a leather portfolio with a kind of courtroom poise that made Dana wonder how many estranged family cases she'd handled this year. Warren cleared his throat and looked to Dana first. "Thank you all for being here. Let's begin by confirming the parties understand this is a non-binding mediation, meant to explore resolution before this escalates further." Dana gave a quiet, "Understood." Morgan chimed in immediately. "Look, I think we've just had some miscommunication. This was never supposed to be a fight." Dana turned her head slowly. "You emptied my closet while I buried my sister." Morgan's mouth twitched. "I was trying to help. You said yourself you didn't want clutter." "I said I didn't want casseroles," Dana replied. "Not to have my life boxed and priced." Franklin opened the first folder and slid a document across the table. "Let's move to facts. This is the purchase agreement for the property in question. Dana M. Whitaker is the sole title holder. She paid 52% of the down payment and co-signed the loan after Morgan's credit was insufficient for approval." Lauren glanced at it, lips pressed tight. "She lived there for years under the assumption that the home was a shared gift. And yet," Franklin continued, unfazed, "no legal transfer was initiated, no rent paid, no deed recorded under her name. We are here because assumption is not ownership." Warren leaned forward, reviewing the pages. "This is airtight." Morgan shifted in her chair, her voice rising slightly. "You were never going to move in, Mom. You said it yourself. You like your space. You don't even like that neighborhood. Why go through all this now?" Dana placed a printed screenshot on the table, a post from Morgan's Instagram. The caption read, "Cleaning out the past to claim the space I built myself." Underneath, her name was tagged on a box labeled Mom's Scarves. "You were never supposed to empty my grief," Dana said, "not while pretending to hold it." Morgan looked down at the paper, then away. "It wasn't personal." Dana tapped the receipt Franklin had just presented. "This says otherwise." Lauren interjected, her voice calmer than Morgan's now. Would your client be willing to extend the timeline for vacating? 60 days, perhaps, to allow for proper relocation? Dana looked to Warren, then back to Morgan. Her voice was even. 30 days, no grace period. Morgan stiffened. You'll regret this, she said under her breath, loud enough to echo. Dana stood slowly, collecting her binder. I regret only what I allowed to go on this long. Outside, the air had cooled, and the first signs of a storm were threading through the sky, gray veins stretching low. Dana walked to the curb without looking back. Inside the building, Morgan sat frozen, staring at the document that finally told her what she'd lost. Morgan storms out, muttering, You'll regret this. She had 30 days. I gave her 29. For 29 days, Dana said nothing. She didn't respond to Morgan's pointed TikToks, each one a tight-lipped performance of victimhood layered with indie music and captions like, Imagine being punished for being your mother's daughter. She didn't reply to the followers commenting about toxic boomers or narcissistic matriarchs. She didn't even watch them. Her friends did. Margaret texted links with sharp commentary, but Dana preferred not to look directly at the storm. She was already building the shelter. The legal wheels had already turned. The date was set. She had filed the final documents with the county registrar, updated her estate planner, and moved her utilities over to a forwarding address. All of it happened quietly, efficiently, like setting a stage for the final act of a play that had gone on one scene too long. Morgan, meanwhile, had refused to pack. Neighbors told Dana she was still throwing garden parties, still having Max's school friends over, still acting as if nothing had changed, but Dana knew better. That kind of performance only came from panic wrapped in denial. She contacted a relocation service Franklin recommended, professional, discreet, and, most importantly, fast. I'd like the team scheduled for the 30th day, she said over the phone. I'll pay in full now. Please confirm they will not back out. They won't, the woman on the line assured her. We're known for delicate transitions. Dana smiled faintly. This one won't be delicate, just overdue. She spent the following week preparing the back end of her life like a seasoned archivist. She updated the deed transfer conditions with Franklin, revised her health proxy, and rewrote a final clause into her estate. Legacy equals voluntary only. No heir shall receive benefit from my estate unless their history reflects presence, care, and integrity. Franklin, reviewing it, raised an eyebrow. Direct, bold, borderline poetic. It's not poetry, Dana replied. It's policy. On the 29th day, the weather turned. Gray skies gave way to a heavy drizzle. Dana drove across town, stopping only once, to purchase a single sheet of cream stationery and a narrow roll of pale silk ribbon from a boutique paper store. The woman at the counter wrapped it with such care as if she knew the note would carry more than words. That afternoon, Dana sat at her desk and wrote with her favorite fountain pen, Lillian's, the one she'd used in every holiday card since the late 90s. Her handwriting was clean, clear, unrushed. Morgan, per our mediation, your move-out deadline arrives tomorrow. A relocation team will arrive at 9 a.m. I will not be attending. All remaining items will be cataloged and stored. Unclaimed belongings will be donated after 60 days. There will be no further extensions. Dana. She folded the letter, slipped it into an envelope, and tied it with the silk ribbon. At 7:45 p.m., she drove to 47 Sycamore Lane and walked up the familiar path in her raincoat, the drizzle brushing against her collarbone like cold breath. She placed the envelope gently in the mailbox and stepped back, her fingers damp, her chest still. She didn't linger. The next morning, she awoke to her phone vibrating on the nightstand. Margaret had texted a link. She's really going for it. Dana clicked it open. It was a post from Morgan, a filtered selfie taken in front of the now half-empty living room, boxes stacked neatly behind her, Max's toy chest sealed shut. The caption read, "Kicked out by the woman who raised me. Some people never heal, they just punish. Goodbye. Home, family is a choice." Dana didn't comment. She simply whispered, "Yes, it is." Then she got dressed for the final handoff. Morgan posts a farewell photo, caption, Kicked out by the woman who raised me. She went viral. I went silent. The internet didn't. The post reached 100,000 likes before Dana had even heard about it. By the time Margaret sent the screenshot, subject line, "Have you seen this?" It had doubled. It was Morgan's face, front and center, makeup smudged in just the right way, her son nestled tightly against her side, and behind them, a moving box marked home in permanent marker. The caption, written in lowercase for emotional effect, read, "Evicted by the woman who raised me. No explanation, no apology, just paperwork. Toxic parents. Ja healing hurts. Ja truth hurts." Dana stared at the screen for a long moment without touching it, then set her phone down without responding. Outside, the sky was beginning to gray, soft clouds pooling above the garden in thick, silent layers. Her tea had gone cold beside her. She didn't notice. Over the next 2 days, the story spread, not through news outlets at first, but through accounts that specialized in curated victimhood and aestheticized grief. Morgan's post was reshared by mental health influencers, child-rearing bloggers, and a life coach who captioned it, "You never know who's wearing the mask." Dana said nothing. She posted nothing. She didn't even mention it to Franklin. Instead, she repotted her succulents. She realigned her estate binders. She added a new entry to her journal and slept with the window open, letting the early spring breeze erase the edges of a week that would have wrecked her once. But the silence didn't mean surrender, and the internet, it seemed, had an appetite for truth, eventually. 3 days after Morgan's post went viral, someone in a local real estate group recognized the front steps in the background. A woman named Tanya, whose niece had once rented across the street, posted the address under a thread titled, "Wait, doesn't her mom still own that house?" By nightfall, a full property record had surfaced. It wasn't a hack. It was public record. Plain, searchable, and final. Dana M. Whitaker, sole owner of record title, established 5 years ago. Transfer history, none screenshots circulated fast. New comments flooded the thread. "Wait, so she was living in her mom's house all along? This changes things, big time. Kind of manipulative to say you were evicted if you never had legal claim." The backlash turned subtle first. Likes slowed, then stopped. Comments became more cautious, more curious. Morgan quietly changed her caption. It now read, "Grief is complicated. I never meant to suggest it was mine, just that it hurt to lose." She restricted comments shortly after. Then she deleted the post. Donna didn't smile, but she did feel something close to breath returning to her chest, like air entering a room that had long been sealed shut. On Thursday afternoon, a small envelope arrived by mail. The handwriting on the front was unfamiliar. The return address was from a town she'd never visited. Inside was a single note card, unlined, thick with fiber, hand-torn edges. "Dear Dana, I saw what they wrote about you. I know what it's like to be made into a villain when all you did was draw a line. My daughter has done the same. Thank you for holding it together in public. You gave me the courage to do the same. No reply needed. Just know you're not alone." There was no signature, just a final line written in bolder ink. "Some of us are still watching." Dana folded the letter gently and placed it inside her journal beneath the previous day's entry. Then she wrote in her own. Script, slow and deliberate. Silence carries weight. It breaks what shouting can't. The next morning, as Dana finished her second cup of coffee, the phone rang. She didn't recognize the number, but the voice on the other end was professional, practiced, exact in tone and rhythm. "Mrs. Whitaker," the woman said, "this is Lee Patterson with Windmere Properties. I represent a client who recently viewed your listing at 47 Sycamore Lane. They're prepared to make an offer above market, but there's one request." Dana adjusted her glasses. "Which is?" "They'd like to meet with you, in person, before they sign anything." Dana paused, the silence widening. "And why?" she asked. "Would a buyer want to meet the woman who's leaving?" The voice hesitated only slightly. "They said it's not about the house, it's about the story behind it. Realtor calls. We have a serious offer, buyer wants to meet you." She emptied my closet. I filled hers, with a key to a home she'd never step in. The rain had softened by the time Dana arrived at 47 Sycamore Lane, the clouds still heavy but no longer threatening. The sky above the house was a pale pewter, and the porch, freshly swept, no longer shadowed by Morgan's potted plants or wicker chairs, looked clean for the first time in years. A car was already parked in the driveway, a beige minivan with crayon marks on the back window and a missing hubcap. Practical, used, loved. Dana stepped out of her sedan and walked up the path with the envelope tucked beneath her coat. Inside it was the signed contract, the title transfer papers, and one handwritten note she'd stayed up late to finish the night before. On the porch stood a woman no older than 40. She wore a long navy coat and had 3 children clustered behind her, 2 boys, 1 girl, each holding a reusable shopping bag filled with books and coloring pencils. The woman extended her hand as Dana approached, her grip firm, her eyes cautious. "Mrs. Whitaker?" she asked. Her voice was steady, low-pitched, the kind of tone that had weathered years of urgent care clinics, school meetings, and long days without backup. "Yes," Dana said, "but just Dana, please." The woman hesitated, then gave a soft smile. "I'm Callie, and these are mine." She glanced back at the kids who looked up but said nothing. "I didn't expect the offer to come through, and I certainly didn't expect to meet you." Dana handed her the envelope and motioned toward the porch swing. "Let's sit for a moment. The house will still be here when we're done." Callie nodded and followed. The children quietly sat on the edge of the steps, whispering among themselves while Dana and their mother took a seat beneath the overhang. The wood creaked gently as Dana leaned back, pressing her palms flat against her lap. "I have to ask," Callie said after a pause. "Why are you giving this away? You could have rented it. Sold it high. This market's a gift for someone like you." Dana didn't answer right away. She watched one of the little boys pull a rubber band off his wrist and loop it around 2 fingers, fidgeting. She felt the chill of the spring wind crawl up her spine and smelled damp wood and the faint scent of old mulch in the garden beds. "Because some people forget what was given," she said finally. "They believe receiving is the same as earning. It isn't. Not in families, not in houses, not in life." Callie studied her for a long moment, then reached into the envelope and pulled out the title sheet. Her hands trembled slightly as she read. "This is real?" "It is. You'll find a stipulation. Page 3. The home can't be converted into a rental, not ever. It has to stay a home, not a transaction." "I wouldn't dream of it," Callie said quietly. "I've moved them 4 times in 6 years. I've never had keys that meant more than 30 months. They've never had roots." Dana leaned in, her voice low. "Then bury them here. Let them grow." Callie's eyes filled, but she didn't wipe them. She folded the paper with care, like something sacred, and tucked it back into the envelope. "I'll treat it like it was earned," she said. Dana stood. "That's all I ask." As she returned to her car, she saw Morgan's sedan pull into the cul-de-sac across the street. Her daughter was alone. She didn't step out. She simply sat in the driver's seat, engine still running, watching as Callie's children walked through the front door of what used to be hers. Dana didn't wave. Morgan didn't either. And Dana realized, with startling clarity, she didn't need a wave. She didn't need anything. The transfer had already happened, not just the deed, the dignity. Her phone rang as she pulled into her driveway. It was Franklin. "You ready?" he asked. "To transfer the funds to the foundation?" Dana looked out at her garden, daffodils pushing through soft soil. "Yes," she said. "Let's begin." Dana's lawyer calls. "You ready to transfer funds to the foundation?" "She monetized my grief. I donated hers." The first check, clear. On a Monday morning, printed on embossed stationery with Dana's name tucked modestly into the upper left corner. She didn't hold it long, just enough to sign it, press it into the envelope, and hand it to Franklin. But she watched the envelope leave her fingers with the kind of attention usually reserved for heirlooms. The official name of the fund, the Lillian Whitaker Resilience Grant, had taken Dana 3 weeks to choose. She rejected over a dozen versions that sounded too soft, too vague, or too performative. Resilience was the word Lillian had used in the hospice bed, voice thin but defiant, when she'd said, Just make sure what they remember is that we stayed standing. The fund's mission was simple, clean, and sharp-edged. Small grants to women over 50 who had lost someone and were ready to return, not just to work, but to life. No lengthy essays, no desperate narratives, just verification, vision, and one page. What are you ready for? The first recipient was a retired librarian from Asheville, 59, widowed, had lost her husband to early-onset dementia and was now applying for a hospice care certification. Her application included one line Dana couldn't forget: "If I'm going to carry grief, I want to use it to ease someone else's." The $5,000 grant didn't come with a press release, just a handwritten letter and a box of homemade preserves that showed up on Dana's porch a week later, along with a card that read, "This helps more than you know." 2 weeks after the fund launched, Dana received a call from a local NPR affiliate. A reporter named Elise had found the public listing, read the title transfer, traced the buyer's story, and requested a quote. Dana didn't want to speak, but Franklin encouraged her. "Tell it once," he said, "before others rewrite it for you." The article published on a Thursday. The headline ran quiet but firm: "When a mother reclaims her grief with grace, a legacy redirected." They didn't name Morgan. They didn't need to. Within 24 hours, donations began to trickle in. Some small, some anonymous, a few with notes typed in all caps like whispered confessions. "She sounds like mine. This fund gives me hope." Dana didn't track the totals. She left that to Franklin. What she read were the notes, the digital comments, the messages sent to the foundation's inbox, the small ways strangers mirrored her own unspoken ache. During her next therapy appointment, her therapist, Rachel, leaned forward slightly and asked, "Do you feel angry anymore?" Dana thought about that. She thought of the scarf folded carefully in the drawer. She thought of the tea tin she'd cleaned and returned to her kitchen shelf. She thought of her closet, now full of only what she had chosen to keep. "No," she said, "I just feel clean." Rachel smiled, not the kind of smile reserved for progress charts or breakthroughs, but the kind given to someone who has finally stopped bleeding internally. That evening, Dana pulled out a cedar box from the top shelf of her closet. Inside was the scarf she'd found weeks ago at Goodwill, the marigold one with hand-stitched edges, a birthday gift from Lillian during a year when neither of them had felt like celebrating. It smelled faintly of rose and old paper. She unfolded it slowly, smoothing the fabric across her palms. Then she placed it on a padded hanger and slid it between a tailored black jacket and her navy church coat. Not because she needed it, but because now it belonged again. The next day, just before dusk, Dana opened her mailbox to find an envelope with her name written in slanted cursive she knew instantly. The handwriting had changed slightly, a little messier, a little uncertain, but it was Morgan's. There was no return address. She stood on the porch for a moment, the envelope cold in her hands, the sky dimming around her like the house was holding its breath. She didn't open it. Not yet. Morgan sends a letter, handwritten. She finally wrote something, but she still couldn't say sorry. The envelope sat on Dana's kitchen table for nearly 3 hours before she touched it again. She had set it down after retrieving it from the mailbox, then gone about her afternoon as if it were no different from the grocery flyer beneath it. She brewed tea, watered the ferns in the foyer, folded linens with extra care, the kind of deliberate folding that comes with avoidance. When she finally slid a butter knife gently under the seal, the sound of paper splitting felt sharper than it should have. The letter inside was written on lined stationery with a floral header Dana vaguely remembered from a drugstore aisle. Cheap, forgettable, the kind printed in bulk for people who didn't know how to say things out loud. The handwriting was unmistakable, though. Slanted to the right, round at the vowels, a little rushed. Still Morgan's. "Mom, I didn't know how else to do this. I know it all looks bad, but it wasn't meant to hurt you. You shocked me. You were cold. You never even tried to explain. I felt like I lost everything at once, and you acted like that was fine, like I didn't matter. I wasn't trying to disrespect you. I was trying to move forward. You always told me not to let grief swallow me. I thought that's what I was doing, letting go. I didn't mean harm. I just didn't know what else to do. Anyway, I hope you're doing better. I miss Max seeing you. I miss you too. Morgan. There was no date, no love, no sorry. Dana read it once, then again, slower. She laid it flat on the table, placed one hand beside it, and stared at the space between the lines. So much defensive softening, so little actual regret. Morgan had always been skilled at implication, at giving just enough sorrow to be perceived as sincere without ever surrendering the power of accountability. It was a skill she had learned from watching others avoid it. Dana stood, poured herself a half glass of wine, and walked into her study. The room was dim, lit only by the amber glow of the late afternoon light filtering through linen curtains. She sat at her writing desk, pulled out a thick sheet of cream paper, and reached for Lillian's old fountain pen. She didn't draft. She didn't pause. She wrote exactly 3 lines. You removed what mattered. I did the same. This was never about punishment. It was about clarity. I wish you peace. She let the ink dry for 30 seconds, then folded the page with perfect symmetry and sealed it in a plain white envelope. No return address. No embellishment, just Morgan's name, written cleanly in block letters. At the post office, she stood in line behind a man arguing about stamps and a woman mailing cookies to her grandson. When her turn came, she handed over the envelope without expression and watched as the clerk slid it into the outgoing bin. No ceremony, just release. That evening, Dana sat cross-legged on the floor of her bedroom, a shoebox in front of her filled with old cards and letters. She thumbed through birthdays, holidays, postcards from Lillian sent during her trip to Prague in 1989. Some were creased, some still smelled faintly of her sister's hand lotion, jasmine and clean cotton. At the very bottom was a note Lillian had once left in Dana's glove box after a particularly cold week of silence between them, years before the diagnosis. Don't let them box your hurt. Use it. You're good at turning hard things into structure. Do that. Dana pressed the card to her chest just for a moment, then placed Morgan's letter beneath it. Quietly, without malice. She labeled the file folder it went into, closed. The following morning, Franklin called. Quick note, he said. You might want to sit for this. I'm sitting. The Lillian Fund? He said. It's just been shortlisted for a state-level humanitarian award. Dana blinked. You're joking. I'm not. We've been asked if you'd be open to a televised segment. Outside, the first hint of sun pushed through the curtain seam. Dana didn't answer yet. She just looked up and let the warmth find her. The Lillian Fund is nominated for a state-level award. She assumed she'd be written in. I rewrote the page. The decision wasn't impulsive. It never is when it comes to legacies. Dana spent the entire morning at her desk, sleeves rolled to her elbows, hair pulled back, glasses perched low on her nose. The estate binder was open before her, its spine worn, tabs color-coded with decades of revisions. Births, deaths, graduations, divorce decrees, amendments drafted with hope and redacted with heartbreak. Morgan's name had once appeared in nearly every section. Healthcare proxy, co-beneficiary, successor trustee. Once she'd even been designated Dana's literary executor. For the sketchbooks, the lesson plans, the journals Dana never truly thought anyone would care to read. Now Dana turned page after page, crossing out Morgan's name with a calm hand. Her pen moved in smooth strokes, not rushed, not spiteful, just precise. Franklin sat across from her at the dining table, silent until the final page was reached. That should be the last reference, Dana said, capping her pen. He looked at the updated stack, his expression unreadable but tinged with something between admiration and awe. You've protected it, everything. Your intent, your assets, your autonomy. It's a masterpiece of ethical redistribution. Dana let out a short breath through her nose. It's not revenge, Franklin. It's correction. He nodded. It's also airtight. Anyone who tries to contest this will be very disappointed. The new clause Dana added sat dead center on the final page, in bold font and double-spaced lines. This estate will honor those who honored my grief, those who witnessed it, held it, responded to it with care, not convenience, Entitlement does not constitute presence. Memory does not entitle claim. Morgan's absence was no longer a line item, it was a philosophy. She turned next to the named beneficiaries, her nephew Eric, who'd called Abistezi after Morgan's post went viral, not to pry but to say, "I always knew you carried the family better than they let you show." He was now listed as a partial beneficiary of the living trust and granted oversight rights to ensure it remained aligned with Dana's wishes. Lillian's friend Diane, who had driven 3 hours to drop off soup the week after the funeral and stayed on the porch just to say, "I don't expect conversation, I just didn't want you to feel invisible," was included in a clause gifting her one of Dana's art portfolios and a travel stipend to pursue the cross-country train trip she'd dreamed of for years. And Callie, the new homeowner, though they'd only met once, was now the fund's secondary trustee if anything happened to Franklin. The note beside her name simply read, "Knows what shelter means. Will never let it become transaction." After Franklin left, Dana remained at the table alone, the late afternoon light casting warm rectangles across the hardwood. The documents were signed, notarized, sealed in 2 manila envelopes, one for the courthouse, one for her fireproof safe. There was only one item left on her desk, the original deed to 47 Sycamore Lane. Morgan had never seen it, had never asked to. She had built her ownership not on paper but on assumption, and Dana had let her for far too long. She picked it up gently. The paper had yellowed slightly around the edges, and the ink was smudged from the time Lillian had spilled iced tea across the dining table during a game of bridge. Dana had always meant to reprint it. She never had. She stood, walked slowly to the shredder in the corner of her study, the one Franklin had given her after her identity had nearly been compromised in a minor data breach 5 years ago, and fed the title page in, one edge at a time. The sound was clean, mechanical, final. Paper became strips. Memory became protection. As the last of the deed disappeared, Dana said aloud, quietly, not for drama, but for certainty, "This time, I'm not leaving anyone room to assume anything." She places it in the shredder. The shelves are full again, but none of it's borrowed. The new closet wasn't large. It didn't echo with emptiness like the old one had after Morgan's purge. It was compact, warm, and lined with cedar shelves that Dana had installed herself, measuring, sanding, and staining each one over the course of 3 Saturdays with Lillian's old playlist humming in the background. Nina Simone, Joni Mitchell, silence. The good kind. She opened the door slowly that morning, holding a steaming mug of chamomile in one hand and a linen-wrapped bundle in the other. Sunlight from the bedroom spilled across the threshold, catching on the brass knobs and brushed mirror that made the small space feel bigger than it was. Inside, everything was hers. No items on loan, no pieces stolen under the guise of decluttering. Nothing that smelled like someone else's judgment. On the top shelf sat a single framed photo of her and Lillian, their arms wrapped around each other at a street fair, funnel cake sugar still clinging to their fingers. They were laughing, windblown and unposed. Dana had nearly thrown it away once during a low night. Now it was the first thing she saw every morning. Next to it was the blouse Lillian had given her 3 Christmases ago, deep teal with a floral trim. Dana had never worn it outside the house, too delicate, but today she took it off the hanger and held it up to her chest, pressing the fabric against her ribs like it could whisper something back. Below that, tucked into a basket labeled letters, was the note from the librarian in Asheville, another from a grant recipient in Kansas who had returned to teaching ESL after her husband passed. Dana reread both occasionally, not for reassurance, but as reminders. Grief could be planted. It could grow. In the corner sat a small journal. The cover was black leather, soft around the edges. On the first page, in Dana's handwriting, was the title, Things I Kept. The entries were short. Not poems, not lists, just markers. The teacup Lillian liked best, the story Max told about the moon, the exact shade of silence in my garden the morning after the deed was shredded. At the foundation office, the energy was different now. Women came in with quiet power, not desperate need. Dana had started leading Tuesday sessions, informal mentoring groups for women returning to the workforce after loss. They didn't talk about jobs right away. They talked about identity, boundaries, what it meant to make space for yourself after someone else took all of it without asking. One woman, Lorraine, a former paralegal who'd cared for her mother through a decade of dementia, asked during their circle, "Do you still miss her?" Dana looked up from her tea. The question didn't sting like it used to. "I do," she said, "but I don't miss being dismissed." Lorraine nodded. Another woman smiled into her cup, and then someone laughed, a small, gentle ripple that cracked the surface of the room in the best way. They toasted with their mismatched mugs, no speeches, no sentimentality, just warmth that settled in, like finally walking into a room where no one had rearranged your things without permission. That night, Dana returned home to find a package at her doorstep. It was addressed to Dana M. Whitaker, Executive Director, the Lillian Fund. Inside was a letter on thick cardstock with gold foil trim. The words were printed in serif type, formal but celebratory. "We are pleased to inform you that your story has been selected for inclusion in the upcoming documentary series, Matriarchs, Women Who Rewrote the Ending." There was a filming date. There was a release plan. There was a line that read, "We believe your legacy will resonate far beyond state lines." Dana stood in the hallway holding the letter, the overhead light flickering slightly above her. She didn't rush to tell anyone. She just smiled, slowly, and walked back to her closet, slipping the letter in between the pages of her journal. Not filed under things I kept, filed under things they can't take back. Dana's story is featured in a national documentary series on matriarch resilience. She said I needed to let go, I did, of her house, her title, and her place in my future. The wind had changed overnight. Dana could feel it the moment she stepped barefoot onto the cool stone path that curved through her garden. The air smelled clean, still edged with dew, and somewhere near the fence, a robin was announcing itself too loudly for the hour. It was the kind of morning that didn't ask questions. It simply arrived and offered itself. The daffodils were up, rows of them clustered in the corner where Lillian had once helped her dig shallow trenches during one stubborn April, laughing as she bent with arthritic knees and cursed the soil with affection. Now they stood proudly, their yellow faces nodding in rhythm to the breeze, unapologetically bright. Dana knelt near one cluster, brushing a petal with her fingertip, then resting her palm in the dirt beside it. The ground was soft. It welcomed her. She inhaled slowly, not to center herself, but to feel. For once there was no ache underneath the breath, no catch in her chest. She didn't feel emptied or brave or healed. She felt ready. Back inside, she made breakfast slowly. 2 poached eggs, a half slice of toast, and a handful of raspberries she arranged deliberately on the plate, as if hosting herself. The kitchen was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the house settling into its own silence. Her phone buzzed just as she set the coffee down. No caller ID, just a text with a video file, sent from a number she didn't recognize. She hesitated, thumb hovering, then she tapped it open. The screen flickered and a girl, 8, maybe 9, stood smiling in a sunlit hallway Dana instantly recognized. 47 Sycamore Lane. Same crown molding, same floors Dana had helped stain years ago. The girl's hair was in a crooked braid, and she held a pink construction paper card in her hand. "Hi," she said. "This is our forever home now. My mommy says you gave it to us, but I think you gave it to me. I have my own room. I get to put stickers on the wall and no one says no." She paused, then lifted the card to the camera. It read in thick, looping letters, "Thank you, Miss Dana. I will love this house always." The video ended. Dana stood motionless for several seconds, phone still warm in her palm. Then she hit replay. Watched it again, slower this time. Studied the joy in the girl's voice, the way she clutched the card like it was a certificate of ownership. Dana's throat tightened, not with sorrow, but something gentler, older, like reverence. Later that afternoon, she poured herself a glass of wine, an old bottle Lillian had once gifted her for something worth toasting, and placed it beside a single candle on the dining table. She lit the wick and set Lillian's photo upright in its frame. Not to mourn, not to conjure, just to witness. She opened her journal, Things I Kept, and turned to the last page. The lines were blank, the edges crisp. She smoothed the paper with both hands, then wrote, Today I didn't mourn. I moved forward. I didn't carry her absence. I carried her rhythm, and it finally matched my own. She closed the book slowly, letting the weight of its entries press into themselves. Years of memory, decades of compromise, weeks of clarity. She stood, walked to the closet, and opened the door not to look, but to place the journal inside, on the center shelf, between the scarf and the photo. Then she turned the key. A gentle click, not to seal away grief, but to mark its place. Some things don't get thrown out, they get passed forward, with intention.